Every day, the world moves on as it always has. Cities wake up, work begins, and life feels familiar. But beneath that sense of normality, something is shifting. The climate is changing, and the systems we rely on, energy, food, water, cities, finance, are under pressure in ways we're only beginning to understand. These changes don't live in reports or projections, they are already shaping people, livelihoods and communities. We created the Climate Leadership Podcast so these challenges don't remain abstract or distant, but are explored through the people working inside these systems, making real decisions with real consequences, often without clear answers. This is not a space for fear, blame, or perfection. It's a space for honest conversations about what leadership looks like in a changing world. If you're listening, you're already part of that leadership. Let's begin the conversation.
Welcome to another episode of the Climate Leadership Podcast, where we explore the ideas, technologies, and leadership shaping a climate future. Today, we are discussing EVs and renewable energy, separating facts from myth. As the world works towards reducing emissions and strengthening energy security, electric vehicles, renewable energy, and battery storage are becoming increasingly important. Yet, misconceptions continue to influence public opinion and policy decisions. To help us separate fact from fiction, I am joined today by Mr. Randal Tiny Smith, a global operations leader with extensive experience across automotive, advanced manufacturing, EV infrastructure, and renewable energy. Thank you, Randal, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's get started. You have spent much of your career leading complex engineering, manufacturing, and infrastructure programs. Could you tell us about your professional journey and what first sparked your interest in electric vehicles, renewable energy, and climate-related technologies?
Yeah, I mean, I have an interesting background, I suppose, because I did a career in the Royal Air Force in the military, and that was in aviation engineering. And I sort of reached the pinnacle there. I was chief air engineer for the search and rescue helicopter force, leading 250 people across 9 locations across 2 countries. And I left the military after that, and I joined Jaguar Land Rover. And I actually fell into EVs by accident. Basically, what happened was the recruiter that was putting me forward for JLR put me forward for the wrong job. And I sat there having an interview to be a PM on the X590 program, which meant nothing to me, but I later found out it was the Jaguar I-Pace.
Okay.
And halfway through the interview, I said, "Can I just clarify what you're interviewing me for? Because I was here for a senior manager role for special vehicles." And I pulled up the job spec, and they said, "No, that's not it. This other one." So anyway, that was on the Friday, and then they phoned me up on the Monday and said, "If somebody's come that unprepared to the interview, we've got to have you." And that's how I fell into sort of electric vehicles. And the more I got into the electric vehicles, I took that from concept through to final production, and that car went on to win World Car of the Year 2019 and over 90 international awards. The more fascinated I got by it. And when I started coupling that with my general interest in climate change and renewable energy and everything else, everything starts coming together. So my career started sort of melding through all that. I left JLR and I became the MD of a company, the CEO of other companies working in EV charging and then renewable energy. And I became fascinated by it. And I'm one of those people that likes to understand, because I'm an engineer by background, understand how things work and why things work. And I became very passionate about it. And then from that, I've gained 23,000 followers on LinkedIn. I get invited to speak at industry events, conferences and webinars such as this. And I just enjoy sort of talking to people and clarifying waylaying their concerns and trying to give people a bigger picture. So many people focus on the small picture, which we'll come on to, but not on the bigger picture of why things are happening.
Right. Okay. So climate change remains one of the biggest challenges facing society today. From your perspective, why is reducing our dependence on fossil fuel so important? And what role do EVs and renewable energy play in that transition?
I think it's what you have to do is you have to understand the bigger picture. And this is the problem that a lot of councils and governments look at the here and now. They look at the short term. We have to fill the welfare and the NHS and all that sort of business, but they don't look long term at what's happening. We have various data that says from the industrial times, the 1750s, temperatures have been rising because of our use of fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, that sort of stuff. And the temperatures have been rising as a result. And that's been causing greenhouse gases. If you look at something like the UK and you look at what is the largest greenhouse gas emitting sector or CO2 emitting sector, it's actually transport, comes in at 29%. And if you drill into that, about 80% of that is road transport. And if you drill into that, 54% roughly comes from cars and taxis. So that's why governments are focusing on moving people from petrol and diesel cars to less polluting cars, alternatives like hydrogen, electric vehicles, or biofuels. And for various reasons, electric vehicles are winning that race because they have a supporting infrastructure around them, etc.
Right.
And that's what a lot of people don't understand is the reason why. The other thing that a lot of people, you get Trump, the other side of the pond, is going, nope, it's all a load of rubbish and everything else. But if you look back over the last 800,000 years, because people go, CO2 levels back in when dinosaurs were around, much higher and plants are there and we're still here, great. But then if you look at the last 800,000 years, man has been on the earth for 300,000 years. And they can track the carbon emission levels over the last 800,000 years. And it's in the last, say, 60 years that the acceleration rate and the climb of carbon emissions is a lot greater than it ever has been in the last 800 years, even though it's coming out of the ice ages. And that's why scientists are worried at the moment that that rate of climb is unsustainable. That's why we've got to do something. But so many people just look at the short term rather than the long term thing of the implication. I'm all right now. Somebody was on the television the other day with the recent hot weather and saying, well, if this is climate change, bring it on. I'm enjoying sitting in my back garden, doing this. But then, the crops are failing, the ice caps are melting, the water tables are rising, yada, 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 all the way through. Right. So there's implications of what's going on and what's happening. And a lot of people don't really understand that. And this is one of the things I always try and do is explain that bigger picture, why we need to do things, why we need to move to EVs, why we need to move to renewable energies, to cut back our carbon emissions.
Right. So, Randal, I was thinking like in current geopolitical scenario with the blockage of Strait of Hormuz, the world is coming to understand that we are still so much dependent on oil and gas.
Yeah.
Economies are about to crash because of this blockage. So why do you think we are still so much dependent on oil and gas? Because after Paris Agreement, there has been a lot of conversation on renewable energy, but still we are far behind.
I think one of the problems you have, and people you've got to understand, is that something like renewable energy or the transition of EVs is a transition and not a cliff edge. So something like that is not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long-term thing. And one of the problems we have at the moment is that people are sitting there and going, okay, we'll switch to renewable energy. And the government has set a target UK government set a target of 2030 that they want to be 95% clean energy, which is a mix of renewable energy and nuclear energy. Now, nuclear has a severe byproduct, but it is a clean energy. It doesn't give off carbon emissions. So we are gradually working to that at the moment. I think about 55% of our energy in the UK comes from renewable sources at the moment. Where it gets challenging, and China have just experienced this, China had a massive rise in coal usage for energy generation, right?
Yes.
And people keep highlighting that. They take a snapshot and say, oh, it's a load of rubbish, blah, 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 and everything else. But there's a case of speculate to accumulate. They were using a lot of that coal energy to build the renewable components and the solar components in order to switch to renewable energy. Right. And their rate of climb in renewable energy was such that their 2030 targets in 2025 kept going. But now, as coal was dropping off, we're now seeing coal starting to go back up again because of the rise of data centers. which require these massive amounts of power. And this is one of the problems we've got at the moment is while the renewable energy is going up and increasing, it's struggling to keep pace with the growth of data centers and the energy demands they have at the moment. So you're kind of seeing the fossil fueled energy taking off and then starting to go up again because of this data center. But again, it's a transition. It's a long term, we're going in the right direction, but it's just going to take a long time to transfer over and do everything. And then the other problem we have is in the UK, we have a particular problem with the infrastructure. So, for example, we have wind generation up in Scotland, and then we can't get that through the infrastructure, through the grid, to say London, where it's needed in the south. So we pay the wind farms to switch off, and then we pay likes of France to import excess electricity to us to use down in the southeast, with London, which is a crazy thing. So the grid's going through this massive modernization program as well at the moment. So there's a whole raft of loose ends that are coming together where people are trying to make this all happen, but it's just going to take time.
Right, understood. Okay, so coming back to the electric vehicles have become increasingly popular, yet there is still significant skepticism around them. What are the most common myths about EVs that you encounter, and how do you fact check them?
It's an interesting thing. I mean, in the past, it used to worry me because people were just totally resistant. And one of the problems is a lot of people have a headline awareness of issues in the newspaper. So, they'll read EV catches fire or something. And, a classic example, there was a ship that sank in the Pacific, which was carrying 3,000 vehicles from China to Mexico, and it caught fire. But the way the paper reported it was it said ship carrying EVs catches fire, right? Which factually was correct. But when you got into the detail, 3,000 cars, of which 68 were EVs, right? And it was never proven that an EV caught fire.
Yeah.
But, everyone got that. Everyone got on the social media spreads it. And then everyone just gets the perception that EVs are dangerous. The batteries are exploding, they're causing potholes, blah, 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 and everything else. So people have this natural downer on EVs for whatever reason, because it draws clicks. This is what the media do. The media don't publish a positive news story. They tend to positive negative because it draws clicks. And the same with social media. People want likes, they want clicks, so they'll put a negative thing out there. And the problem with social media is you can tell a lie once, it remains a lie. Tell it 1,000 times, it becomes the truth. We've seen this time and time again. I think with EVs, it's just a case of batting it down time and time again and saying, people go, EVs are causing potholes because they're so heavy. And I go, well, okay, they're the same roads used by the heavier lorries, buses, and vans. You shoot the argument down straight away. Batteries are always exploding. Really? Petrol cars are 20 times more likely to catch fire than an EV. And there's proven facts on that. So it's just a case of keep chipping away at it, keep going at it, and keep going. There will be people who you will never convince. They just want to argue for the sake of it. And they have a thing of, we have a thing in the industry called whataboutery, because they'll come up with some, random 20-year-old paper from EVs proved by some professor in Mongolia or something. And you'll discredit that. And then they'll go, oh, okay, well, what about this? Or what about that? And they'll just pull all these other facts up, and you just keep discrediting all of those all the way through. But I think it's interesting because the industry now, what we're seeing is when we start disproving all the facts, then the naysayers, we call them, will turn around and say, well, I don't believe you anyway because you're in the industry and you'll say anything to protect your own interest. Well, no, I'm just telling you the facts. And then if it becomes from an independent source that says EVs are okay, they'll go, well, they're just being paid by the government to support the automotive industry. So you can't win either way. But it's very interesting because we're now getting to the stage where the naysayers are preaching to a diminishing audience. Because as we've seen with the Iranian crisis at the moment, Strait of Hormuz blockage, EV sales are rocketed at the moment because people are now realizing that EVs are cheaper to drive. So they're going, well, hang on a minute, let's have a look at what these EVs are about, because I can do 40 miles in my EV for 55p, but it costs about £5-6 to do that, in old money, in a petrol or diesel car. So people are starting to realize that these naysayers, what they're saying isn't true. But, this, and that's what I said to you earlier. We find that a lot of people are resistant to change and resistant to get EVs. But once they step into that EV arena, about 90% never want to go back to petrol or diesel cars again.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So, I'm just thinking like a world event like the current political scenario which is happening, geopolitics, that is driving the best case for people to adopt because the fuel prices are going up. So they are looking for other options. So I think that, like you mentioned, it's a slow transition, but these big events create that transition, right?
Yes. Yeah. And they help to accelerate it. But you also get a certain amount of peer pressure. I got an EV, and then people in my small village started seeing the EV and go, what's all this about? And then I started explaining it, and then, oh, actually, that makes sense. So they got to get EV, and then, the neighbors, the Joneses have got it, so we're going to keep up and buy an EV. And it starts making sense. And it's not just cleaning the environment, it's improving people's health as well. If anybody's walked their children or walked through London during rush hour, and you can almost taste the exhaust emissions. And during COVID, when all the traffic stopped and we were all, confined to homes, all of a sudden the air was so much cleaner in London and major cities because the traffic wasn't there.
Yes.
Now, if you had EVs, you'd have the same thing. You wouldn't have that taste in your mouth of the emissions and stuff. So it's, as well as the emissions, it's the health aspects and all numerous aspects to consider.
Right, correct. Okay, so one of the criticism which is often raised is that EV batteries create substantial environmental impact through mining and manufacturing. How should people evaluate the overall environmental footprint of EVs compared to the traditional petrol and diesel vehicle?
So this is one of the arguments that a lot of people say, that they take a snapshot to support their argument against EVs. And if you look at the brand new car and say, right, compare a brand new petrol car to a brand new EV, you are correct that the EV has a higher carbon footprint because of the manufacturing aspects of the battery. But what you have to do is you have to consider what we call the TCO, the total cost of ownership, and look at the total life of ownership. So even though the EV has a higher carbon footprint, you've got to understand that from the moment you drive it from the showroom, it is zero emissions from then on. Whereas a petrol or diesel car has continuous emissions throughout the life. That carbon footprint from the battery is paid back after the EV does about 11,000 miles, after which it then continues on for many more thousands of miles of emissions-free motoring. And if you look at the full life of an EV from cradle to grave compared to a petrol car, there's about 3 times less emissions on an EV than there is for a petrol car. So it's just the same as you could save money buying a fridge, which has got a B energy rating. But if you spend a little more and get something with an A plus or an A plus plus energy rating, you're saving money over the longer run on the running costs. And that's what you've got to consider is the longer term TCO, total cost of ownership.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. So, Randal, at Jaguar Land Rover, you played a key role in delivering the Jaguar I-Pace program, which became one of the world's most successful electric vehicles. What lessons did you learn from bringing EV innovation from concept to large-scale production?
I think it was a huge challenge because it was the first ever electric vehicle done by Jaguar, the first battery we ever had to deal with. And we were in a race with the likes of Audi and BMW and everything to be the first premium OEM or manufacturer to bring an EV to the market. So we had to build the car from the ground up because we never had built one before. So it's entirely, you've got a motor rather than an engine in there. You've got a battery you've got to consider. We had to debate about the motors. Did we put one motor in the car, 2 motors, one in back, one in front, or 4 motors, one in each wheel? And how was that going to work? How are we going to charge it? How are we going to handle it? We had to consider about what you do with the battery because we never dealt with a battery before. So if anything goes wrong on the production line, how do we deal with that? How do we stack it, supply it, transport it, etc.? And I had to deal with all the policies and that, organizing the safety policies. So I think it's one of the interesting aspects that came out of that, and it tied in with my military training, was that a lot of people were very concerned of operating with a high voltage system. So the battery of the electric vehicle on the I-Pace particularly was 400 volts. And to many of the engineers working with that, they saw that as a one-way ticket if you got it wrong. But I remember working with my guys in the military who were running radar systems, which had far higher voltages. And I said to them, as long as you just follow procedures and do the training and everything else and use all the safety gear, you'll be okay. Right. And I think once they started trusting the gear and trusting the gloves and trusting all the safety gear and the tooling, they started getting, confident in what they were doing. But it was a journey. It was quite a journey. As I say, we were in a race with other manufacturers. I remember when we used to build the prototypes at Whitley, and then we'd ship them over to Gaydon through using the test tracks. We registered car as a petrol hybrid because we knew the media used to sit around Jaguar Land Rover and they could look at the number plate and determine what the car was. And what we did additionally to that was we also put a couple of exhaust pipes on the back to try and confuse people that it wasn't an electric car. The fact this thing drove by you totally quiet and didn't make a sound, nobody picked up on. But of course, when we launched it, everybody went, wow, great car, and World Car of the Year in 2019 and 90 international awards. But it was a journey, and it did show us what could be done when we put our minds to it. And of course, Jaguar are now doing this Reimagine program, and they're launching their new EV this year, the GT.
Right. Okay, so renewable energy is sometimes criticized for being unreliable because solar and wind generation depend on weather conditions. How do battery storage technologies help address this challenge and support a more resilient energy system?
People are very correct about that, and it's one of the things that, again, the naysayers will come up about, and they'll say, oh, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine and it's useless, blah blah blah. And that's where battery storage comes in. So theoretically, what you do is you take your excess energy from your solar or your wind and you store it in the battery during the day, and then you use that during the night or periods when there's not enough energy coming through. And it sort of balances out. That's what it does. The other thing that's interesting with that is that the national grid in the UK, can tap into that battery if you've got the system set up, and they can use that to balance the peaks during the day. So if you've got excess battery storage during the day in your company or on the grid or a solar farm or something, then they can pull that forward. So when there's peaks, when industry is operating in the day, they can use that excess energy in your battery to smooth out those peaks. So, it becomes very, very interesting from that point of view. Another thing which is interesting to tie together is we said about EVs earlier, and a lot of the manufacturers now of EVs are now predicting that the batteries will actually outlast the cars themselves. And what we're seeing is the circular market opening up, which then reuses old EV batteries as energy storage devices for perhaps a decade or more before they are then 100% fully recycled. So hence you're now starting to see old EV batteries being used in home setups as energy storage devices. So there's a huge circle sort of, linking EVs, renewable energy and everything all together.
Okay. Randal, I was also thinking about the efficiency, like transmission efficiency. Like if you store something in the battery and then take it out later on, the efficiency drops a lot. What are your views on that efficiency part?
Well, you're talking about a massive number, because a lot of batteries are designed to go through so many cycles, quite a few cycles, well beyond what anyone's going to be charging them through. Batteries will decay over time, but it depends how you treat the battery. If you go back to EVs, you're advised to hold the battery between 20 and 80% for longevity. And you can't take it up to 100%, you go below 20%. But for longevity, hold it between those two. Modern battery chemistries with LFP now say, charge it up to 100% and keep it at 100% all the time. And likewise with storage batteries, try and keep it at certain levels. I mean, the batteries are designed to be stored to 100% because of slightly different chemistries and stuff. They will degrade over time, just the same as your mobile phone battery, your torch battery dies out over time. But with EVs, with batteries, you tend to have a battery management system which controls the temperature and the charge rates and everything else in order to enhance that longevity. And that will increase the efficiency of the battery over time because you're controlling the charging aspects and the discharge aspects of that battery.
Okay, makes sense. So, energy security has become a major concern for governments and businesses around the world. Can renewable energy and battery storage help improve energy security while also supporting climate goals?
Well, yes, obviously, because if you go to if you look at solar and wind energy, for example, then you're not producing any carbon emissions per se when they're in operation. Yes, there will be a certain amount depending on how they were manufactured.
Mhm,
If they were using renewable energy to manufacture, then your carbon emissions are really minimal.
mhm,
So this is why you're seeing the government moving towards renewable energy. And the UK government, for example, has set this target of 2030
mhm.
to achieve this 95% clean energy aspect. And this is why you're seeing all the investment and the growth. I think if you look at the Clean Energy Action Plan for 2030, I mean, they've got plans for offshore wind is currently about 30 gigawatts, I think, is produced. And they have a plan to get to sort of 43 to 52 gigawatts, I think. Onshore wind is about 15 gigawatts at the moment. They want to get to 27, 29. Solar is about 22, 23 gigawatts, and they want to get to about 40, 45. So it's all driving forward to get it up there. Um, but again, it's, people resist change. They don't want to see solar farms in the distance. They don't want to see a wind turbine in the distance. They don't want it anywhere near their home. But then the governments were talking about, one of the advisors told the government and said, well, if people live near somewhere that's generating renewable energy, why don't we give them cheaper energy if we've got excess coming off the thing?
Right.
So there's options that are being considered to try and entice people into government, into this policy. But ultimately, it should produce cheaper energy than lumping coal or gas or whatever else.
Right.
And in the current, let's say, in the Straits of Hormuz crisis that we've got at the moment with the Iranian war, it just shows how dependent we are on oil and gas, and hence prices have gone sky high because of geopolitical situations. So if we have that on our own land, our own wind and solar, generating our own power, there's your energy security.
Yeah. Also, in some news or articles I've been reading or hearing about North Sea oil rigs, and US president is pushing like, why doesn't UK government start drilling North Sea oil rigs? What are your thoughts about that? What is that?
Yes. It's an interesting. One of the things that was very disturbing was the whole Paris Agreement thing mentioned earlier, um, and the whole climate thing. When Trump was first in power, before this occasion, his first term, he pulled the US out of all the agreements and went, drill baby drill and all this business. Then Biden got in and put them all back in the agreements and put all those green incentives in. Trump's come back in, he's pulled everyone out again. Trump is one individual, and theoretically, he's gone in 3 years' time, 3 or 4 years' time, 2.5 years' time. Who comes in after him? You don't know. The rest of the world is still getting on with this climate change thing and trying to sort out the Paris Agreement and limit global warming, etc. Drilling the North Sea is an interesting one because, on the one hand, we are trying to move away from carbon emissions. So we're looking at these alternative energy sources, such as solar and wind. But then I go back to the case we had in China, where I mentioned earlier that they were limiting their coal usage now as they were moving to renewable. But the growth in data centers now is so great that they've now had to use coal again to supply the extra thing. And I think that's one of the hidden aspects with drilling the North Sea again, is that, yes, we've got untapped oil fields down there. We're going to increase our carbon emissions, but we can't get the renewable energy uptake so fast that we need to bolster it up in order to get these data centers and other data hungry, energy hungry devices going forward. So I don't agree with it, but I understand the bigger picture of why it needs to be done. My only concern now is which way Parliament's going to go, because at the moment we've got this sort of let's achieve net zero by 2050, but then the parties are sort of arguing amongst themselves that if Conservatives get in power or Reform will get in power, or whatever else, they're going to abolish the net zero targets and everything else. So you kind of, where are we going to go then? Because at the moment everything's in place. we're driving down carbon emissions. We're trying to achieve 2030 net zero on energy and everything else, and 2050 on net zero. But yeah, it's going to be an uneasy few years ahead, depending on how the political situation plays out. And then, of course, when he eventually leaves, depends on if the Republicans get in, the Democrats, which way all that's going to go. So, yeah, I keep a watch on it. There's not a lot I can do about it in my humble position, but so.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much uncertainty about policy also. No one knows, right?
Yeah, and it's very interesting because I get cited. Trump says it's a load of because my network on LinkedIn is spread around the world, and when America come online and comment on my posts, you can very quickly see who's a Trump supporter and who isn't by what their affiliation is. EVs are bad and renewable energy is bad, and my Mr. Trump says so therefore I believe him. And others are going, this is crazy. I can't get a decent EV because he's put tariffs on China and So it's very interesting to watch the comments develop and how people view that and how people take the administration aspect out in America and what they're doing.
Right. Okay. So Randal, finally, looking ahead to the next 10 years, what opportunities and challenges do you see for electric vehicles, renewable energy, and the broader energy transition?
Looking at electric vehicles, I think one of the things, you've got to understand that electric vehicles have been around for about 200 years. And in the 1890s, they were outselling gas cars by 10 to 1 for various reasons. And then the electric starter motor developed and gas stations opened up along longer routes, and eventually the gas car took off. More recently, because we've realized what our emissions were doing from vehicles to the atmosphere, we started focusing on electric vehicles again, and battery technology had caught up to make it a more viable solution. And now what we're seeing is an exponential growth in battery technology. Ranges of batteries, because battery density is getting better, the range is going from 100 mile, 200 mile, out to 1,000 miles if we want it. I think what will happen with EVs is we're going to get to a point where do we really need a car that does 1,000 miles between charges if your average petrol and diesel driver is content with a 500-mile range at the moment on their cars? So what we might do is cut the range back on a thing, which will reduce the size of the battery, which reduces the weight, which makes it more efficient, but also reduces the cost of the vehicle. And that way you'll have a smaller battery, which does 500 miles. Charging speeds are also getting better as well. We're getting up to sort of sub 10 minutes for a full charge. So if you're charging fast with a smaller battery, it kind of makes sense. I think renewable energy is going to continue to grow because we have to keep growing it. People keep going that, oil and gas are going to run out. And I keep getting these counters thrown at me saying, oh, it's all going to run out in 50 years. Yeah, right. No. There are masses of untapped oil wells, oil fields around and gas fields around the world. And one of the arguments is how much do you want to pay to get it out of the ground? So if it's on the ground, pay me $1 a barrel, no problem at all. But if it's 100 feet down, you're going to pay me $100 a barrel. So that's the thing, is it's going to get to the stage where it's so expensive that it makes sense to move to renewable rather than trying to dig the oil and gas out of the ground. So and the other thing I think overall is the education piece. And it comes back to what I said right at the start, is a lot of people look at their own narrow world and just say, well, I'm going to continue to use my gas car because I'm familiar with that and I want to maintain my own status quo. But they don't understand the bigger picture of why we're doing this, why we're going to EVs, why we're going to renewable energy. And there's that big education piece that I'm part of. What I just keep telling people when I go to conferences and I'm speaking at conferences and saying, this is the reason why we're doing this. This is the reason why we're going to renewable energy. And you could almost see people having this light bulb moment where they suddenly go, I never thought of it like that, and then it starts going forward. And normally, after the conference, I get a lot of people coming at me and take my business card and connecting up with me on LinkedIn. And if I can help people do that transition, and if I can help educating people, then that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I hope, this sort of podcast helps people and they learn something from it.
Right. So thank you, Mr. Randal, for sharing your insights today. This conversation highlights the importance of looking beyond headline and focusing on facts when discussing climate change, electric vehicles, and renewable energy. While the challenges remain, innovation, engineering, and leadership continue to drive progress towards a cleaner and sustainable future. The key takeaway is clear: informed decisions and evidence based discussions are essential, accelerating the energy transition. Thank you for joining us on the Climate Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your network. See you next time. Until then, take care and have a nice day. Bye bye.